Hello everybody. My brother and I decided to build a catio for my aunt and her cat. My brother told me he would provide for the materials if I was able to build it for her. I want to show you in this video the steps I took to put this together, and I hope it encourages others to maybe build one as well for their furry friend. I went to Home Depot and got the things I thought I would need to begin building this. I got this roll of galvanized half-inch square mesh to cover the sides of the catio. I also got a couple of 2x3s and I began cutting them to the size I needed for my first panel. I laid the pieces of wood on the floor and used 2.5-inch screws to attach them to each other to form my first panel. I didn't get to film everything I did, so I'm stopping the video to show you guys what exactly is happening. Here I got my stapler and my sheet metal cutters to begin attaching the wire mesh to the wooden frame. I wasn't sure how to line up the mesh to the wood, but I unrolled enough of it to cover the entire frame and began to staple it. And this is what it looks like once the wire mesh has been attached to the frame. This was the first panel I made for the catio. I then made a second panel and attached both of them together using the same 2x3s, and together this created the box enclosure for the catio. With the box done, it was time to start putting together all the different shelves and adding the supporting arms that would hold them in place. My aunt requested to have a long shelf on the top for the cat to walk on, and I added the support for this first and continue adding more to it. I'll stop the video here again because I added a lot of things to the enclosure that I unfortunately did not film at the time. First thing you might notice is the door that is now on the enclosure. This door is actually just like the two side panels I built first, but with a support cross brace added to keep the gate from sagging down. There are also two door hinges on the left side. I also added this barrel bolt to keep the gate closed so that the cat won't get out. There is also now a floor on this enclosure. What I did to attach the floor to the enclosure is add the same 2x3s I've been using to build this. I added one piece across, and this also helps to add more support to the enclosure. I then added two side pieces to this for additional support for the floor and the enclosure. And lastly, I added 4 blocks of wood to the corners of the enclosure to help stabilize the floor, and these will also help when attaching the 2-inch casters that the enclosure will be on top of. Looking now on the top, you can see some additional bracing I have done to the top shelf support frame. I have one long piece of wood extending from one side of the enclosure to the other, and then I have a smaller piece of wood extending out that will help support the edge of the shelf that will lay here. To support this smaller arm, I have a piece of wood that I have cut at 45-degree angle, which extends diagonally. You will see this triangle shape throughout this enclosure, as I found it to be most convenient way to support my shelves or risers. And lastly, towards the rear of the shelf, you will see another piece of wood that is tying these support braces together to further help support both the top shelves. You might have also noticed these other pieces of wood. They are to support the carrying handles to lift the enclosure, but I will show you a better angle of this later in the video. Up above the enclosure, I have added more 2x3s from one side of the enclosure to the other. These add additional support to the enclosure, but their primary purpose will be for adding the top galvanized mesh. And here again, you see another piece of wood going from one side to the other, and this triangular frame to support the arm where the middle shelf will be added to, and another piece of wood going diagonally across to secure all this in place. For the bottom shelf or riser, I have repeated the same thing as above It's just basically two triangular shapes. Notice how I didn't extend this piece of wood all the way to the edge. I try not to worry about getting the precise lengths right, as I was trying to use all the leftover pieces of wood. Now over to the side, I have my shelves already cut up, and I also have this small box that will serve as a step or just something the cat can climb on top of. Moving on to the outside of the enclosure, there are these two wooden pieces that I have added to serve as the carrying handles for the enclosure. The enclosure will be on top of 2-inch casters, but it will need to be carried to its final location. All of these shelves will be getting finished with 2 layers of carpet that I purchased from Home Depot. I have laid it out on the floor and I am using scissors to cut through it. And unfortunately, I do not have footage of me attaching the fabric, but I'll give you a close-up of how it looks once it's done. We are now in the calm and quiet town of Buckeye, Arizona. With the help of my brother and my dad, we have delivered the Catio to my aunt's house. And I would like to show you the end result of this build. First thing to point out is that the 2-inch casters have now been added to the bottom of the enclosure on those 4 wooden blocks that I attached to the corners for the floor. These casters have locking brakes so that the Catio will not move once it's moved to the desired location, but should it ever need to be moved again, the casters make that very easy to do. I purchased this hammock on Amazon and I thought it'd make for a nice addition to the Catio. The gate now has a handle to make it easy to open and close. As I open the gate, you can see that the floor now has the carpet attached to it that I showed you earlier. The floor, the small step, and the shelves have all been covered with 2 layers of the carpet. I did double layers so that the cat can scratch into it for a longer time before it needs to be replaced. Now the way I attach the carpet is simply using an air stapler. You can make out the locations of the staples by the small points created on the surface. Now looking over at the rear of the Catio, you will see a scratch post. This was made using a 2x4 wooden stud and wrapping the carpet around it and stapling down the edge of the carpet, and I will show you how that is held in place in just a few seconds. But first, I have here a small wooden bench or step. I showed you this earlier in the video before covering it with carpet. You can see the 2 layers of carpet that is on this small step, and I also painted the sides of the wooden box to make it match the carpeting. The shelves on the Catio have been stapled down to the triangular frame that I showed earlier, and then finished with 2 layers of carpeting. Here is a close-up of what that top shelf looks like, and a point of view of what the cat might experience and see as he sits here. Now looking back at the scratch post I made, you can see here the method I used to anchor it to the Catio. It's just a right angle bracket attached to the 2x4 scratch post and the floor of the enclosure. And up on top I have a 3/8 bolt attaching the scratch post to one of the support braces of the top shelf. And that is basically everything that was done in this Catio build. I didn't record as much as I would have liked to, but any question you may have about this build, I will be happy to answer in the comments for you. If you haven't already, I kindly ask that you please subscribe to my channel and you click on the like button to help spread the video for others to see.